From this moment on, we visit Pompeii, the city frozen in time by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year A.D. 79. The radiant morning sun rises, and until 1 p.m. that day, someone is born, loves, marries, and fights. But after 1 p.m., everything in Pompeii changes. Through the records left behind, we will carefully trace the footprints of the lives they lived, the graffiti left on the walls, and the bowls set upon the dining tables, the feelings left unspoken, and the footsteps that suddenly came to a halt. Following the breath of that single day, their joys and worries, trivial quarrels and affectionate greetings, we will try to feel them as authentically as possible. This is Beneath Mount Vesuvius, though lived 2,000 years ago, surprisingly, so much like our own lives today, the story of their ordinary yet precious lives. Let us take a look at what kind of city Pompeii was. The area inside the city walls is about 0.64 square kilometers. That is roughly the size of 90 soccer fields. The population was between 10,000 and 20,000. The city was smaller than one might think, but extremely dense. Multi-story apartment buildings known as insulae were tightly packed together, and houses and shops were naturally intertwined. A grid of streets crossed the city, and at its center lay the Forum, the heart of politics, religion, and commerce. There were also theaters and an amphitheater. The amphitheater, in particular, could accommodate about 20,000 people. Having a seating capacity equal to the entire population of the city meant that Pompeii was a city of events, drawing in people from neighboring towns. Along the streets, ox-drawn carts pass by. They are fully loaded with jars or amphorae. Inside them are signature products of the Mediterranean, such as wine, olive oil, and garum. The amphorae bore labels, making it possible to identify the products and trace their distribution. The port of Pompeii, at the mouth of the Sarno River, was a distribution hub for garum, agricultural produce, and wine. The goods brought in through the port flow into the markets, taverns, and restaurants, with diverse cultures and goods gathering. Endlessly like this, Pompeii was a vibrant, living commercial city. Now, let's look at the classes of Roman society. In Pompeii, the relationship between aristocrats and slaves was clear: master and property. Aristocrats and the wealthy lived in a domus, decorated with gardens, ponds, and ornaments. It was a house that symbolized status. Slaves were legally property, and the house did not run without them. On the other hand, commoners lived in communal housing called an insula, literally meaning island. The first floor had shops, taberna, and the upper floors were often residential spaces, and the higher the floor, the cheaper the rent, but the poorer the living conditions. Due to a lack of water and sewage facilities, they used public toilets and communal wells. However, the emancipation of slaves was relatively common. Slaves became freedmen, and there were even those among the freedmen who became commercially successful and wealthy. However, as a full aristocrat, it was difficult to be recognized. Instead, through donations, patronage, and public office, they had to build their honor. In the same city, someone lived in a house with a garden, and someone else endured the day in a small room. That is another face of Roman society. In Roman citizen families, childbirth was not a simple family event. It was a crucial moment to gain a legitimate heir and to pass on citizenship. A child born from a lawful marriage followed the status of the father. Because childbirth always carried risks, families prayed to Juno Lucina, the goddess of childbirth, and wished for a safe delivery. A doctor was not always by their side, and the central figure assisting the birth was the midwife. Most children were born inside the home. When a child was born, through the ritual of the father lifting the child, called tollere liberum, they finally received legal and social approval. On the 9th day for a boy and the 8th day for a girl, they received their names informally, became members of the family. Afterward, boys hung a bulla and girls hung a lunula around their necks. Because it was an era with high infant mortality, parents desperately hoped for the protection of the gods, and these amulets were also a social indicator, announcing that they were not yet adults. At the center of the Roman family is the father, the authority of the head of the household, patria potestas. That power influenced the child's status and property, and even their marriage. Children learn to work in their father's shop, mastering the ways of trade and how to treat people, naturally preparing to continue the family's business and responsibilities. In this way, sons were the ones to inherit the family's name and social status, and daughters played the role of expanding connections between families through marriage. Children were not simply individuals, but the future of the family. On the day they came of age, they wore the toga virilis and laid down their childhood amulets. At that moment, they stepped forward as a citizen. The son inherited his father's name, citizenship, and social status, exactly as they were. The relationship between father and child in Pompeii was built upon a strict legal order, but within it, the unchanging love between parent and child, a clear affection toward the children, and a deep responsibility existed together. The walls of the city were not simply walls. Filled with graffiti, they were a bulletin board of emotions. Wherever people gathered, just as much as political slogans, many confessions of love are contained. Around the theaters, baths, and the forum, and the taverns near the city gates and the amphitheater, those walls were a single comment section. On the walls near the amphitheater, passionate confessions toward gladiators were also discovered, and sometimes a rival's challenge is written. Confessions of love were left in various ways, conveyed directly in words, writing names on the wall, or declaring love by adding the blessing of Venus, a city where there was almost no privacy. Perhaps that is why. Romance was not a personal secret, but a story the city read together. Their love and lives, forever, became unerasable writing, and it remained on the walls. The stage for a Roman aristocratic wedding is not a temple, but the home. Consent to the marriage is made in front of witnesses, and the house is splendidly decorated. Marriage is not a matter of two people, but becomes an event of the families. The highlight is the deductio. It is a street procession taking the bride to the groom's house. Torches light up and songs ring out. As the bride crosses the threshold, she is sometimes lifted by the groom. Inside the house, rituals symbolizing fire and water continue, and the night flows into a banquet. For women, marriage was a responsibility for childbirth and family succession, but some women also owned property and participated in business. And in traditional aristocratic families, a stricter form of marriage called confariatio was also passed down. The groom and bride shared spelt wheat bread together and took their marriage vows in front of 10 witnesses. Now, let's go down to the streets. Today is, more than usual, exceptionally noisy. Two men mixing in hand gestures raise their voices, and across the street, a small crowd is gathered. Here, politics is not a world separated from daily life. When election season came to Pompeii, every wall was filled with dipinti, election posters. Upon a small temporary platform, an aedile candidate steps up and gives a speech. He says he will take responsibility for market management, maintenance of public facilities, and the stability of the grain supply. Supporters in the front row nod their heads and respond favorably. In Pompeii's political culture, patronage and connections were essential conditions. Candidates hosted gladiator matches or plays at their own expense to gain the support of the citizens. Meanwhile, someone scratches off and erases a competitor's name written on the wall. Politics here is not a discourse discussing ideals, but a reality where honor, wealth, and the interest between groups collide. As for Pompeii, the entire city was a market. In the Macellum next to the Forum, freshly caught fish are laid on the ground, and the smell of meat and the scent of salt mingle together. At the roadside thermopolium, warm food boils, and the sound of wine hitting glasses can be heard. At the bakery, freshly baked bread pours out, and garum and olive oil are placed in amphorae and moved to another street. Pottery, lamps, fabrics. Passing through human hands, they circulate the city, the sound of coins clinking, voices of bargaining. Cash comes and goes, and credit and trust are written down in ledgers, the banker's records. Show that this city ran not on words, but on numbers. Equipped even with standardized weights and measures, this place moved not upon chaos, but upon calculation. There are largely two paths for a commoner to enter the military: the legion, which citizens enter, and the auxiliary forces for those of non-citizen origin. The costs for equipment and food are deducted, and training and marching, construction and guard duty are repeated. In Pompeii, soldiers were primarily in charge of maintaining city order and defense. But by enlisting in the Roman legions to various parts of the empire, such as Gaul, Germania, and the East, they were also dispatched. Fierce battles and intense battlefields, and a long service of 20 years means spending half of one's life in the military. Still, the reward after discharge, money or land, was the promise that kept the soldiers enduring. The auxiliary forces, after a long service, often received citizenship. Pompeii was once a city that settled many military veterans. As the city grows, conflict also grows with it. The existence of those who could be called mercenaries in Rome were auxiliary forces, military veterans, and private armed groups. In Pompeii in particular, there was tension between veteran settlers and existing residents. Land and houses, political influence, and even culture were bound to clash. The amphitheater riot in AD 59 is a symbolic event of this. Citizens of Pompeii and Nuceria clashed during a match, and records remain that the use of the amphitheater was restricted in its aftermath. Gladiator matches and regional identity, it was a moment when collective emotions exploded all at once. Added to this were private guards and gangs during election season, and conflicts between occupational guilds and city authorities, so the city's tension continued to build up. Although there was a gap in living standards and the emancipation of slaves was possible, it was not complete social equality. Like this, Pompeii was a vibrant city, but it was also an equally unstable space. Pompeii was not a city made up of just a single culture. Various beliefs and traditions permeated one another, and it was a space where they lived on, adding their own colors. When the procession of the Egyptian goddess Isis departed from the temple, carrying the statue of the goddess who presides over the sea, life, and rebirth, the ranks of priests and believers dressed in white crossed the city streets. The festival of Bacchus was, with the dances and songs of splendid dancers honoring the god of wine and abundance, a festival with intense music and dances and rituals close to ecstasy, once the ceremony of Cybele. Enthralled the city, the Floralia, announcing the arrival of spring, begins as a festival honoring Flora, the goddess of flowers and joy. The city was colored with splendid floral decorations and cheerful games and people dancing followed behind the procession. The afternoon of that beautiful day, bearing the dazzlingly shining afternoon sunlight and the faint scent of flowers into the frescoes of Pompeii, it quietly permeated. And even now, in colors that do not fade, it vividly remains. And finally, that day that covered everything. It is the end of the city. The greatest clue by which we can reconstruct that day is Pliny's letter. He recorded a cloud like a pine tree, ash falling like snow, and the retreating sea. The city was already weakened. After the great earthquake in 62 to 63 AD, recovery had not yet been completed, a Plinian eruption that lasted about 18 to 20 hours. Beneath the volcanic column soaring into the sky, pumice and volcanic ash pour down like rain. As deposits piled up on the roofs, the city gradually could not bear the weight. Next, fragments of volcanic rock and hot gases erupt, and finally, high-temperature pyroclastic flows come rushing down the mountain, heat reaching hundreds of degrees, and ash engulf the city in an instant. Roofs collapse, and people were crushed under fallen buildings or collapsed in the clouds of hot ash. The sky became dark, like night, and in the streets, losing their way in the high-temperature ash cloud. People collapse while holding onto each other. The scarred city, just like that, completely came to a halt. What this city tells us is not a massive ruin, a single unreturning. Today, the day we thoughtlessly let pass by is a time that can be stopped at any moment in the face of immense nature. Like Mount Vesuvius visible anywhere in the video, the shadow of death always follows us around, and therefore shouldn't we? Talk a little more, love a little more, and be a little happier? Pompeii is throwing that quiet question at us even now.